So I can't tell who I'm talking to exactly. I can't see who's on, but that's okay. What I believe I was asked to do was to give you a quick update on the status of the construction project. And what I have done is put together maybe 20 slides here on some of the status of the various individual elements of the project, conclude with a couple of financial statements, a schedule, but this shouldn't take me very long. I actually expected more of a preamble of the nature I just described, and then offer up some time to just talk about what's on your mind. And I think I have other representatives of the project already joining. And so if we get into details on things like commissioning, I see Chuck is joining. Will and Leanne are both here if we want to get into details on the DM. So let me just go ahead and start, and then we'll see where we go. So to start with, if I can get rid of this insert. Cannot. Okay, so to start with, as I often do, not in WBS order, but starting at the summit. We've seen in the last several months a lot of very good progress with the basic infrastructure on the summit. The picture of the building hasn't changed a whole lot. I'll talk about the dome in a moment. But inside, we've really started to transition from constructing of a new building to maintaining a new building. And that's sort of in the basic infrastructure. So you see comments here about closing out the Basalco contract. That was the prime contractor. It's really nice to finally get that contract done and out and resolved. But most importantly, it's really the progress that's going on. And the image on the far right was an element that we had the responsibility to install and commission, and that is the lift. It's called the P-flow lift, and that is the 80-ton mechanism that brings the mirror and camera from the maintenance facility at level 3 to the top of the telescope azimuth structure, which is level 8. And that was a purchased item, but we were responsible for installing and commissioning and getting that roof structure to work and so forth. I'm happy to report that in the last week, we actually did the load testing and have that essentially complete outside of some weather stripping and weather tightness. So that was a big activity for the team down there. And then there's been some smaller activities, including the picture in the bottom right is a warehouse that, as of 3 weeks ago, looked like that. As of today, is completely enclosed except for the front face. That warehouse was specifically built to house the M1, M3 mirror when it arrives in a couple of weeks, so that it was not just sitting outside. We don't have room for it in the building. We also didn't want to let it sit, and so, but that warehouse was built especially for it, and then of course it will have lots of uses afterwards for storage of equipment. Other activities on the summit include some reworking of the clean room, white rooms for the camera. We're also still in the middle of redoing the hotel for some additional work, for some additional rooms. And so lots of activities going on the summit these days, including, on the next slide, is the dome. Now the dome, if you've been paying any attention, you would know that it doesn't look a lot different on any given day, and that's because the progress is slow. We've had some significant difficulties with that subcontractor and regarding costs and schedule and just general progress. What we're not having difficulty is with the technical performance. Technically, it is coming together quite nicely. In fact, so nicely and to such high precision that it's causing things like schedule problems and financial problems. And so this is a work in progress. It is a continual focus for the whole management team, from the lowest levels in the telescope team all the way up to the top. We're trying to get this dome done. Of course, without a dome, we don't have much. And we absolutely need it to be weather tight for the next phase, which is the telescope mount installation. Be the next page. There, I think the last time I spoke to you all was maybe in November or so. In that at the time we were very near completion of the factory acceptance testing. The image on the top right was the last image taken before disassembly in Spain. And unfortunately, what we've been faced with over the last several months is a very slow disassembly process. It turns out that the amount of space they needed in the factory, the number of resources they needed in the factory, were higher than they had planned, and so we're struggling to get them to get everything onto the ship. 3 containers you can see in the image in the bottom right have actually been packed. I think more than those 3. But it's not so much the containerized parts that are a difficulty. It's the, I think, 17 or 18 parts that don't fit in containers that need to be shipped as break bulk items, just big pieces that will go on a ship loose. And those are the ones that really mark the moment that we can start. Once those arrive, we can really start doing the assembly and integration. Of course, some of those pieces are the actual azimuth track, and as you can imagine, the azimuth track is the last thing to come apart from a test integration, and are the first things we need on the summit. So this is work in progress, and comes up again in this talk in a few minutes. M1M3 has, in the last several months, has gone through some significant accomplishments, starting with the test campaigns that were held in late January, early February. That test campaign was the first time that our glass and our support structures were mated together and tested fully under an interferometer at the U of A. That test campaign was very successful. Showed that we can not just verified that the mirror met spec, but showed that we can control the mirror, at least in the vertical orientation, to the proper specifications, and that the control system was functioning. And so that was a great success, and was immediately preceded by disassembly, and a whole series of logistics pictures are shown here, with the mirror going through sleet and fog and rain, trying to get it to Houston. It's now on the ship. Well, it's an image of the ship on the bottom right. That glass is off the coast of South America and should arrive in Chile in less than a week, next Sunday, I believe. And so that's all progressing very well. The support structure is is also not traveling with the glass, but is also en route. And so all things are looking very good with M1, M3 coming together and arriving on the summit in the next couple of months. So that's all also very good news. Secondary mirror, I believe, maybe if I'm correct in when I spoke to you last in the November-December timeframe, the secondary mirror was already in the shipment, arrived in the summit in December. Since then, we have unpacked it, and it has been the last month and a half been reintegrated on the summit with a surrogate mirror and retested, re-verified for its control system, and to verify that it survived its shipping, and to just start the commissioning process. That's about to get disassembled so that the surrogate mirror can be used as the substrate holder for the coating chamber verification. And so we'll use the secondary mirror surrogate to hold samples while we do the final testing of the coating chamber. And so that will be in the next 3 weeks. By the end of May, the coating facility that you see here in these images will be going through its final acceptance testing with the vendor. That's all going extremely well, with very few hiccups in the process, and we're looking very much forward to seeing this coating chamber in operation. The first operation will be in mid-July, when we are going to coat the actual secondary mirror. We would like to take advantage of the fact that the coating chamber has just been commissioned. It's in the right configuration, and we're going to go ahead. The secondary mirror is there and ready, so we're going to go ahead and immediately coat it and then pack it up for another day, but to take advantage of of the momentum of that coating chamber's progress. Moving over to the camera, for some time now, at least over the last several months, we've been reporting that all of the sensors have been delivered. You'll recall that the sensors are coming from 2 different vendors, E2V and ITL. You can see in the bottom left the numbers from each of the individual vendors, the total numbers being that we have in hand that are science grade, reserve, and engineering grade. a significant number of sensors, but it was a major accomplishment to get those delivered and tested and in-house. Another significant activity with the camera has been progress with the cryostat that has been pumped down, have been going through some of its own sort of mini commissioning to make sure that it's functioning properly. They've done a few upgrades to enhance the vacuum system. They're about ready within the next month, I think, to start installing real rafts. And so this is a big effort in the whole integration effort at Stanford to get this the camera built up from the inside out. Lenses have also been going well with the camera. L1, L2 has already been installed in its fixture. L1 is being installed as we speak. That's all going according to plan. We did find that there was a slight mismatch in the radius for the L1. That's completely correctable by repositioning of the whole L1, L2 assembly. So we continue to work forward to the regular specification, the optical spec, as these small little deviations and small little non-conformance items continue to rack up. The good news is that we continue to think that we are meeting our ultimate specifications. Sorry, my phone's ringing. Anyway, that's going well. Other optics within the camera is also proceeding with the filters being produced with L3 being finished and having its coating applied successfully. So there, everything is moving along quite well. Filter, there's a lot of work that you're probably aware of going on in France with the carousel, the manual filter exchanger, and the built-in filter exchanger, and all of those mechanisms are very much nearing completion. The final acceptance was planned for this month. You may have heard that we had an unfortunate incident with one of our team members working with the hardware, and his was an accident that hurt his arm, not irreparable, but was a significant incident that has delayed the final acceptance for another couple of months to make sure that we fix the safety measures and don't allow that to happen again. But in general, the technical progress is very good, and we're looking forward to that equipment being shipped to California by midsummer. Not that there hasn't been some challenges. You may have heard that there was some contamination issues with the rafts. After about 15 or maybe a dozen rafts had been completed, there was an identification of some dropouts in some of the channels that had not been there before. With investigation, it occurred that, it revealed that there was quite a bit of contamination, and some of the images you see here are some of those flecks, those pieces of metallic dust and particles that we believe were shorting out some of the channels. Anyway, because of the various states of the various different rafts, a campaign was designed and has been implemented to put the different rafts through different levels of cleaning processes and different levels of rework. That is all going well and according to plan, with a few rafts already completed, retested, and many others in the pipeline. In fact, the 21st raft, we need 21 science rafts, is nearing its final completion. And so rafts are in very good shape, even despite the fact that we had this contamination issue and had to be reworked. So on the data management side, there's a lot of progress going on with many of the various aspects. The level 2 milestone for being able to process the camera data was demonstrated successfully. That's a significant milestone in just demonstrating the accomplishment and the capability of the DM stack. its pipelines and the platform in general. And I'll get to some more science algorithm slides here in a moment. But also more broadly, DM also worries about the network. And we had one last little bit of the network to finish and to develop an agreement for, which was the Atlanta to Chicago link. And that now is going to be provided by ESNet. That agreement's in place. And by FY21, we should have the entire protected network in place for data transfer. Release 17 of the pipelines, science pipelines, was finally accomplished. I think that was both good news and bad news. You'll know if you're watching the dates and the delivery schedule. That was originally intended to be completed in November, but there were certain features and capabilities that were not yet available, and we did not release 17 until it was done, until it met its requirements, and that was finally completed in, I believe it was April. And so that's again, this is one of those areas where you could just release the next version without certain features, or you can go through the rigor. And GM chose to go through the rigor and get the accomplishments that we promised in 17. Other areas include the community brokers. Several weeks or a couple months ago by now, we issued requests to the community and those that are developing brokers to issue letters of intent and to provide us proposals for the existence of their brokers and the request to attach to our system. That call is due, or those proposals are due at the end or the middle of this month. The team has already received one, and there are several more that we are sure are in progress. And so that's going to be a very good moment to really inject and to understand where the community stands with their intentions with the brokers. There's also, in a moment, we'll talk some more about a meeting that's being scheduled in June to look into these proposals and to discuss what the capabilities need to be. And finally, the last comment there is you may know that DM has been pushing on several other capabilities and looking into some other value engineering. That's sort of the category I put them in, to look to see if we still have the right balance of our own hardware versus things like cloud computing. And so the proof of concept was developed some 6 months ago, has been going on with Google, and is about to start up and is really continuing on with Amazon as well for various other approaches to doing the computing and the storage for the science data. The original proof of concept has gone well. I think we're still waiting for some costing data to come through to really do the value engineering part of it. We know that it's technically capable. Now we just have to decide if it's how we would want to move forward and redistribute some of the ways that we do computing. So that's been a very good outcome. The next couple of slides are very specific to the science pipelines and Release 17 that I had already mentioned. I think unless there's specific questions that I would let those that are more expert field, my main comment here would be that the team has been very rigorous in the development of the software. They've been very rigorous in describing what's in the various releases and putting out these tech notes and release notes. And if the community was ever thinking about getting more involved into more and ever thinking about getting a better understanding, this is the right time. And in these slides, you can see that the sort of the capabilities that are being developed, where their focus is, particularly for these releases, but also look at the notes, get a better understanding of what's being developed and what's available. Then the next slide is more of the same, but with a better expression of the breadth. Even things I mentioned that it was capable of handling the camera data. The camera data also happens to be the same data flow as the auxiliary telescope data. And so there's lots of various capabilities being developed in these releases that are moving forward pretty much according to plan. And then I had mentioned workshops. I think there's a couple of really important ones coming up. And then there was a recent one, which was the science platform review that was held. Not sure what happened to that. That first bullet doesn't look right. What it's supposed to say is that the team held a science platform full-up design review in April. That went very well. Had outside reviewers as well as internal reviewers look at the entire current capabilities of the platform and the intentions for its development going forward. That went well. Leanne did an excellent job putting that review together. Those materials are available, and where you can see in this link, you can see the actual presentations. But in general, I would say that was very successful and a good outcome, showing the direction is consistent with community expectation, I would say, in most cases. Upcoming, I mentioned already the community broker workshop. That is an invitational meeting that's being held. Invitations have already gone out to each of the science collaborations, inviting them to send a representative to participate. I hope that each of the collaborations does take the opportunity to come join and participate with the project in discussing the availability of the brokers, what's the capabilities that are required for these brokers, and ultimately what do each of the collaborations need and expect to be able to do the science. And so that's a good opportunity coming up in June. And then there's also an algorithms workshop being planned in October, and it's ramping up as we speak, with some people starting to really focus on what the agenda should be and how it should be organized. But those are some two very important meetings to look out for and workshops. And then finally, well, not finally, I got one more after this. EPO is also having some significant successes. They've been working on some formal education activities. Two very specific investigations have been completed for mapping the Milky Way and then surveying the solar system. Those are nice accomplishments. And in addition, accomplished to get them into Spanish language and to be able to start testing them in Chile. The image on the right is Claudia in the foreground, and in the background must be one of the assessment groups looking at some of the tools and some of these investigations being tested, and that's also going quite well in Chile. There's also a lot of material being developed for what we just call basic assets. These are videos for planetarium. These are also videos for introductions to some of these other portals. And Amanda in particular has been working with these contractors to get these videos done to be very representative of the various outlets and to build from to get these various EPO assets in place. Finally, there is a lot of activity going on with the early systems integration work. There's a slide Chuck put together for just showing the various elements of work going on with the commissioning camera on the far left and its focal plane. You can see the 9 sensors in the top left, as well as the ComCam itself in the far left, and then the first sort of pinhole image that it took, or a pinhole image that it took in the lab. So that's activity is going quite well, and is going to have a pre-ship review coming up here in the end of May. The auxiliary telescope is also in progress. The instrument is shown in the middle, bottom middle. That is about to get an upgraded sensor, but is progressing quite nicely, and is scheduled to meet the telescope. Actually, I'm forgetting at this moment when that is, but it should be later this year. as we're racing to get the telescope commissioned in place for this coming fall. And then there's also lots of other ancillary instrumentation going on, particularly the DIM. You recall we have one fixed DIM and one portable DIM, and Brian Stalder has just finished the commissioning of the portable DIM at Cape Peak. That's going well. It's now being shipped to Chile to meet up with the fixed DIM coming from Europe. All good progress, and all very important assets for the commissioning activity. So if we move into some of the dry cost and schedule things, here's just a representation of where we stand from the NSF side. That's the MREFC completion, and the DOE side, the LSST CAM. And the top row, you can see just from the amount of money spent, the level of completion, with the camera really coming to the end game at 90% complete. MREFC at 68% complete. Mostly that 68% completion, it comes from the telescope, and with the DM at about 50% and commissioning at about 30%. And so you can imagine that not everybody's at the same level, but the whole project is moving along, and particularly the representation of the 90% for the camera is important to understand. That we're in the end game. The rest of these are metrics on how well we're performing. If you watch, the SPI is the Schedule Performance Index, and the CPI is the Cost Performance Index. 1 is perfect. 0.95 is bad, and so we're right in there and doing well. Contingency levels are the raw amounts of money that are available in contingency. You can see in the fourth line down is 34.6 for the NSF side and 7.8 at the camera side. Those are getting to be tight. Excuse me. If you look at the very bottom, you can see that the percentages that represents for the remaining work, depending on how you calculate it, is 25% from the raw number, but it's only about 12% for the NSF if you factor in all the things that we know we're going to have to spend money on. That's sort of the predicted variance. And so at 12%, that's really something that catches our attention and something that we're paying a lot of attention to. On the camera side, while their percentages of remaining work are high, the amount of available cash is getting to be very low. 3.2 million after the current expected expenditures is a number that can go away very quickly. So the message here is that we're moving along well, but that we're paying a lot of attention to the remaining contingency. The schedule, the color, the color graphic of the schedule, it doesn't change much these days because the bulk of the 8.5 years is behind us, and was sort of the uninteresting parallel activity. All the activity now is really focused on the end game. Since in this particular calendar year, we did do one more shift of the schedule, and we now have predicted 6 months of schedule contingency. That shows in the things to look out for from the science collaboration standpoint are, when will data be available? And the two best milestones to look at are the engineering first light, which will be coming up in sort of mid-2021 or early 2021, and that's the ComCam work. That is a science raft, a single science raft. There is going to be data coming from that. Exactly how good that data is and exactly what can be done with that data is a discussion that I think you've had recently with Chuck, talking about release of that data. And then the next one is the first light image with the real camera shown at the end of 2021. Now we still have 6 months of schedule contingency. The next slide shows you the two things that are actually pushing our schedule at the moment is the dome completion and the telescope completion. Those continue to be a struggle. In fact, we have currently some what we call sandbox schedules that show that we're eating into that 6 months already and eating into it by 2 to 3 months. And so it's very likely, what I tell the agencies is that we're going to use all the time available. How much of that is going to be done in the fundamental construction aspects of the telescope and the dome and the camera, and how much of that will be used up in contingency remains to be seen. But it's somewhere, this gets you a rough idea. That's not even all that rough. It's a pretty close idea of when the data will be flowing in the mid 2021 timeframe. So my final slide is just the summary of the technical progress is good, and it's an amazing amount of work that's being done across the project. We're dealing with some non-conformance issues. You might hear issues coming from various corners of the project, but all of those non-conformances are dealt with very formally. We're maintaining a assessment of how each of those, however small, might be contributing to the ultimate predicted performance. And right now that all remains intact, and we continue to believe that we will meet the science requirements document. And then finally, as I've already mentioned, cost and schedule are important, and the contingency levels are tight. It's something that we're managing very carefully. We're constantly talking about scope options. We're constantly talking about ways we can be more efficient in how we get to the end game. But at this point in time, there is, again, no change in what we're intending to do from the capability standpoint, despite all of the conversations about how we can save money and find less expensive ways or shorter ways to get to the end game. So that was sort of a very quick walkthrough of the status. I think there's a couple more just picture slides if you're interested, and look at those on your own. But I'm happy to field any questions about where the project is at this moment.
Thank you, Victor. I don't see Fed on the call, so I will take over. We do have few questions in live chat. One is from Phil Marshall about the schedule. So maybe if you could flip back to your slide with the schedule. And it's essentially a question for both Chuck and you. Phil says, in the new schedule, when would the science verification survey observations be completed? And when would the ComCam observations be completed?
I could answer that, but since Chuck is on, I don't even know. Chuck, are you in a position to answer that, or you want me to?
Chuck is on mute.
Sorry, I was muted.
Okay.
So I guess which new schedule are we referring to? The one that's on this chart?
Yes. I would assume so.
So, sorry, by new schedule, I just mean the current schedule that Victor was reporting on. So he mentioned a number of key dates like first light and so on. But I think from the science collaboration's point of view, when the observations are complete is also of interest.
I don't have the dates in front of me. Maybe you do, Victor. But Phil, I think those dates were in the commissioning summary that I presented to the science chairs a while back ago. Maybe you were out.
Actually, I was wondering if they had changed as a result of the contingency being taken up.
I'm trying to remember if we had this. We were at 6 months or 8.5 months when I gave that briefing.
According to the schedule that Victor is displaying, we would get first images with the main camera in the summer of 21. And that would give us a year between getting the first images and going into operations. And so the science verification surveys would have to be squeezed in that year.
Right.
Probably closer to the second half of that year than the first half, because we need to integrate camera and test.
But to answer Phil's question directly, the completion of the science validation mini surveys at the end of commissioning, that completion date is just, I think, maybe 6 weeks prior to the operations readiness review milestone. So it'd be in, looking at the chart here, it's, halfway through FY22.
So that's about March or April of 22.
Accepting the 6 months of schedule. But I think as Victor indicated, that's likely to get used.
So for science analysis of the science validation and verification surveys, I think we should plan for the summer of 22. That's when all these data will become available through Science Platform. Probably not much earlier than that. The first excitement of getting the actual image from LSST with engineering camera with ComCam should happen according to this schedule by the end of calendar year 2020. So maybe early 21, who knows? But what I remember in my head is these 2 dates. When will I see the first image from LSST? That should be early calendar year 21. And when I should have my students ready to jump on this big data set, that's the summer of 22. And it's slipping little bit by little bit. That is correct.
Yes. It's slipping by -0 months plus 6 months, if you want error bars.
So I don't see any other questions. There was a question about presentation on cloud, but Leanne already responded that we won't be ready to have something very interesting before the end of this calendar year. Are there any other questions people want to ask?
This is Michael Strauss. I wonder if you can say a little bit more about the DOME problems. You said the problems are not technical, but managerial. Is it money flow? Is it people? I wonder if you can just say a bit more there.
So I say it's not technical because there's no non-conformances, that the system is coming together technically very well with very high precision, and so that's the part about the technical progress. But the difficulties are absolutely in all of the other elements. It's the cost, it's the manpower, the efficiency at which this particular contractor has been able to work on the summit has been completely impacted by their availability of money and their management of funds. We have a fixed price contract with them, and if they underestimated what the cost was going to be, they end up with those kinds of financial problems. We are, in the end, adding to the fixed price contract so that we can keep progress going. But that still is, it was a year of disruption where the vendor wasn't even telling us exactly how much trouble they were having and what were the impacts. And so it's a classic fixed price contract with a contractor who's essentially, well, they're behaving as if they were bankrupt. It's a strong term, but that's how they're behaving. Does that give you a sense? If you want to go into another level of detail, Michael, we can go even deeper, but I'll spare you those details unless you're really interested.
A reminder that we are recording these talks. More questions? Okay, I don't see any other questions in chat, nor anyone. Was that a question?
Hi, yeah, this is Tom. You mentioned that the work exploring Google as an option for storage went well, and then you briefly said something about Amazon. Is that an exploration that will happen in the future, or is that also happening at the same time? Are they going to be competing with each other?
That is not necessarily a competition. They both focus on slightly different aspects. One area would be just in computing capabilities. In Others would be in how you store it and where you store it. Exactly how that progresses and how that comes to fruition depends on some of these early studies, and not just about what each of them is capable of or others, but also what makes the most sense for us in our scientific objectives. As Leanne pointed out in her answer, I think we still need the rest of this calendar year to really understand what is a potentially new way for us to proceed, and it very much depends on continued technical exploration and success there, as well as what would it cost. And so we need some time to really figure that out still. But the progress so far is good, and the notice to the whole community is that we're considering it.
Victor, I have a question. I'm looking at your slide of the dome, and is it true that this green is called officially Krabbendam green?
It's officially RAL 5018. It is Turkish Blau, or Turkish blue, and I don't think my name is attached to it other than informally by those that have no other way to describe it.
Okay.
Well, it just comes about because all the telescopes you built, Victor, have used this particular color of paint. We're giving you credit, man.
Yeah.
If there are no other questions, let me thank Victor for a very informative presentation.
You're welcome.
Thank you everyone for dialing in. And the next talk in this series will be on June 10th. And it will be Amanda Bauer talking about education, public outreach, construction, and with special emphasis on the tools that will be used by practicing scientists to reach out to community. You can think of them as our own analog of Galaxy Zoo kind of approach, where you have thousands or hundreds of thousands of eyes helping you do certain aspects of science. And the aim is to make this very easy to use by scientists. So Amanda will be talking to you on June 10th. Thanks again, everyone, and see you in June.
Thanks, Jocko. Thanks, Victor.
Thanks.
Thanks, Chuck.